Milena Lazarevic, and I apologize again if I need to improve on my pronunciation, from the European Policy Centre in Belgrade. That's the English translation of their organisation, not to be confused with European Policy Centre in Brussels, of course. Is by now an expert in public administration reform. I first met Milena at a conference in Belgrade and was very impressed with the work she and her organisation does to improve government accountability and to build civil society in circumstances that I don't think we can really comprehend here in Brussels. And certainly it's a very different atmosphere that she operates in compared to Brussels-based think tanks. I think that's enormous value to the public, and so I hope that what Milena is going to do is to share with us some thoughts about what value think tanks bring to the public. So, over to you, Milena.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for helping me with that distinction between my organization, CEP, and the Brussels-based EPC, with whom we cooperate a lot, but we should not be confused with. Thank you, everyone. I'm really thrilled and really glad to be here today. I was asked by Matt to first just start with sharing a little bit about the specific experience and context within which think tanks operate in my country, in Serbia. So I will just spend a few minutes on that, and then I will talk a little bit about what we believe is the value we bring to the Serbian and even the public in our region, in the Western Balkans. So. To start with well, not some, just one number. There is an estimate that there are around 30 think tanks operational in my country. Now, for a country of 7.2 million people, that seems to be quite a high number. However, this number does not represent really the number of pure think tanks which operate in Serbia. A lot of these organizations are old-fashioned, still unreformed, government-financed institutes. And there are very many hybrid organizations. Now, hybrid organizations, meaning organizations which do both activist, deal with activism, and they're also watchdogs, and they also have some small research centers. They're not a surprise in the Serbian context. There is very little demand for policy research by the government still, although we can see some signs of improvement there. And at the same time, external funding, which recognizes this lack of demand on the government side for taking into account policy research and analysis in the policymaking process, is much more focused on support to diverse activist watchdog projects, and with increasing attention being paid to grassroots organizations and local movements. Now, this often drives diversification of activities and programs in the civil society, and very few organizations can really afford to only have the think tank type of activities, so to only work on policy research, policy analysis, and related ensuing advocacy. Funding in our country of all NGOs, so the entire civil society, is predominantly project-based. So there is very little possibility for core funding, for strategic relations and having strategic partners, which basically means that it has a negative influence on the consistency of the programs, of the approaches, as donors who pay for the projects that think tanks implement also sometimes want to interfere with the direction, with the specifics, the specific foci of these projects which they finance. Now, there are increasing opportunities for service and contracted work, which are used as inputs into different TA projects, often with the government organizations, institutions as the final beneficiary, which usually does not impede the independence of the research, but it does impede the possibility to disseminate and take ownership of the products. And very often, think tanks who do this kind of contracted work are then not able and not permitted to use their results and the reports. To use the results of their work to promote and disseminate and advocate more widely. very few opportunities for core funding, and EU-wide mechanisms such as Horizon 2020 are still on the horizon and yet to be more utilized by the think tanks in our part of Europe. Now, in this kind of a context, CEP's approach, my organization's approach, has been to build partnerships. Now, what do we mean by building partnerships? We build partnerships both at local and national level, but also at regional and even beyond the regional level. At local and national level, we usually focus on thematic partnerships. What we do is that we create joint synergic projects with organizations which are focused on a certain topic, certain area, but who do different kinds of activities, who are more activist, who are more of a watchdog nature. And in that sense, we believe that we ensure complementarity of approaches and viewpoints. And we also think that this allows us to focus on on what we do best, which is policy research, policy analysis, and at the same time, we help these other organizations focus on what they do best. And we think that in that way, we create more holistic and comprehensive approaches in treating specific societal problems. But at the same time, we think that we also help these organizations achieve better results, because our approach, which is more systematic, more evidence-based, helps them also structure their projects and their approaches better, and in the end be more methodologically coherent and overall more structured in what they do. So we do a lot of such partnerships in our country, but we have also created regional partnerships, and I will mention that just a little bit further. Now, what value do we think we provide to the Serbian public, to the Serbian society? And how do we try to encourage civil society in our country? Well, although our work is often very much focused on the government stakeholders, it has a vastly important public-facing component. Now, essentially, the reason for us to research and analyze policies and argue for certain issues and our findings is not to help the government itself, but to improve the policies and the wider policy system, in the end, for the benefit of the Serbian citizens. We focus a lot on the horizontal aspects of the policymaking system in our country, because a lot of our initial early research showed that the inherent flaws and deficiencies of the policy cycle in Serbia often lie in the core of certain problems which we see on the surface of certain policy areas, and even they often lie in the let's say in the background of the failures to implement legislation, just as one example. So we believe that as a think tank operating in this kind of environment, one of the first tasks, one of our first jobs needs to be to improve the overall policy system, to improve the institutions, the processes through which policies are designed, created, and planned, and in the end implemented in our country. So we really put the improvement of the overall policy environment and the policy cycle in our country as one of our, let's say, cross-cutting areas of work. And I would be very happy to give some examples later on in the Q&A session if you're interested. Now, we also focus a lot on the EU accession of Serbia because we believe that EU conditionality is really a very good driving factor and driving force for implementing many painful reforms in the country. Painful not that much for the society, but actually for those who hold the power. And our research has also shown that a lot of the reforms which have contributed to a more accountable and more transparent government have actually been implemented largely because of very strong and persistent EU conditionality. At the same time, we understand that EU conditionality will not be there forever. And we're trying to think ahead. Once the countries join the EU conditionality becomes much weaker, as we can witness from the recent developments in several EU member states. And reforms which are often pursued vigorously in the pre-accession process often backslide in the post-accession process. Public administration reform and professionalization and depoliticization of the civil service is just one of those examples. That is why many of our projects have the element and the viewpoint of civil society inclusion and empowerment. And the reason to do that is that we believe that a strong civil society is one of the ways to ensure that once the EU conditionality is out, there are still local actors, strong and empowered local actors who can still continue to drive these reforms and to pressure the government to conduct reforms and not to backslide in the reforms that it has conducted. Now, we believe that it is realistic for Serbia to join the European Union within the next 5 to 10 years, and we believe that there is enough time to empower the local actors to be able to continue pressuring for EU-compliant reforms in the post-accession period as well. And I would be glad to discuss some examples again once we start with the Q&A session. At this point, I will just briefly mention one most recent and probably most relevant example, and that is I would say our flagship EU-funded regional project, which we call Weber. It is a project in the area of public administration reform, which we implement through our regional network of EU policy think tanks, which is called Think for Europe Network, or TEN, where we have partners from all Western Balkan countries, plus the EPC from Brussels. And through this project, we aim to empower the civil society in the Western Balkan region to monitor public administration reform in these countries based on evidence and on the basis of EU criteria, the so-called principles of public administration, which are developed by Sigma OECD and DG NIR. Now, this project is supposed to build the regional and national civil society platforms for monitoring and for dialogue with the governments on public administration reform, and to work, and it will work to strengthen the capacity of the local CSOs and of these regional platforms to apply those principles in their work. And the rationale of the project is that if local non-governmental actors take ownership over those Sigma principles, which drive EU-compliant public administration reforms in our region, and force the governments to be more accountable for the reforms they conduct in this area, which is now, as some of you might know, considered one of the fundamentals, one of the fundamental reforms in the EU accession process. We believe that once the EU and Sigma, as let's say the factors and actors driving this external conditionality, once they are out, there will be strong enough local actors who will continue to pursue and to pressure for these reforms. So this kind of a method and approach is very strongly involved. And also the other very strongly involved method is that through this project, although it is driven by several think tanks, in each of the countries, what we actually want to do is we want to join and create partnerships and local coalitions of civil society organizations which will pursue these reforms and monitoring mechanisms in different ways and through different methods of work, which we believe will create complementary approaches. So this is just one. I think I wanted to put a little bit of a of a flavor to what I was saying, so just not to stay too general, but I would be happy to discuss more about more details later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena.